They timed every reaction. Her reflex broke the counter and printed beyond measurable HFY. The room was white, quiet, and perfectly balanced. The air did not smell like metal or plastic. It smelled like nothing at all. That alone made people uneasy. The testing chamber floated at the center of a massive orbital station. Outside the wide glass wall, space moved slowly. Stars stretched thin like distant scratches of light. Inside, everything waited. A young woman stood on a dark circular platform. Her name was Mara. She wore a plain gray suit with no marks, no rank, and no symbols. It fit close to her body, light enough to forget she was wearing it. Her hands rested at her sides. Her face was calm, but her eyes were alert, always moving, always checking. She had been told this was a simple evaluation. Around the chamber, behind clear barriers, observers from dozens of species watched in silence. Some were tall and thin, others short and heavy. Some had eyes, others used light sensors or shifting membranes. All of them trusted numbers more than instinct. This place existed for one purpose: to measure reactions. A tall figure near the central console spoke in a smooth, neutral tone. "Subject ready." Another voice answered, colder, older. "Begin baseline timing." A soft sound echoed through the room. It was not loud. It was not sharp. It was designed to be harmless. Mara did not move. Numbers flowed across the large display above her. Neural delay, muscle tension, breath rhythm, heart response. Everything sat within expected human range. One observer nodded. Another lost interest. Humans were known quantities. Fragile bodies. Fast thoughts, but slow compared to machines. They reacted well under pressure, yes, but nothing special. The Coalition had tested thousands of species over centuries. They knew what mattered. Mara shifted her weight slightly. The system noted it, logged it, moved on. "Proceed to stimulus phase 1, the console voice said. The chamber lights dimmed by a fraction. A thin line of energy flickered in the air near Mara's left side. It was not dangerous. It was only meant to startle. The signal had not fully formed yet. Mara moved. Her arm snapped up. Body turned, her foot slid back. Motion was smooth and complete before the light finished appearing. The line of energy vanished, disrupted by the air pressure of her movement. The room froze. The display hesitated. Numbers stuttered. A soft alarm chirped once, then went silent. "That is incorrect," an observer said. The stimulus was incomplete. A technician leaned closer to the screen. "The subject reacted at negative delay." "That is not possible." Mara lowered her arm slowly. Her breathing stayed even. She did not look afraid. She looked confused. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked. No one answered her. The tall figure at the console raised one long hand. "Reset the system." The lights returned to normal. The display cleared. "Equipment error," another observer said, more firmly now. "Repeat." Mara stayed still. She focused on the empty air in front of her. She had been trained not to think too much during tests. Thinking slowed things down. "Begin again," the console voice said. This time, the stimulus was auditory. A sharp tone, faster than thought, tuned to bypass conscious processing. No human had ever reacted before hearing it. Mara's head tilted. Her shoulder moved. Her body shifted half a second before the sound played. The tone rang out into empty space. Mara was already out of its path, heart rate rising, muscles ready. The display went dark. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a single word appeared in pale light. "Error." A low murmur spread through the observers. "That is twice," one said. "Run diagnostics," another ordered. Mara swallowed. "Is something wrong with the room?" The technician's hands moved fast across the console. "All systems nominal." "That is not possible," the older voice said again. "The subject cannot react before input." "She did," the technician replied quietly. The tall figure turned its attention fully to Mara. "Human. Describe what you experienced." Mara thought for a moment. She chose her words carefully. "It felt like something was about to happen. That is vague." She shrugged slightly. "I don't know how else to say it." Silence followed. "Proceed to final baseline test," the older voice said. No warning. A few observers shifted. This was unusual. Baseline tests were meant to confirm limits, not push them. Mara's jaw tightened. Did not step back. The air in the chamber changed. Pressure adjusted. Light bent in subtle ways. The system prepared a compound stimulus, visual and kinetic, tuned to overwhelm instinct. The signal was released. Mara moved like the room had whispered to her. Her body reacted as one piece, Not thought, not choice. She ducked, twisted, reached out. Her hand passed through empty space where the stimulus should have been. The energy wave struck the platform behind her instead, cracking the surface. The display exploded with motion. Numbers climbed too fast to read. Lines overlapped, warnings stacked on top of warnings. Then everything stopped. The screen went blank. A thin line of text printed itself across the bottom. Beyond measurable. The words stayed there, unmoving. No one spoke. The chamber felt smaller now. One observer broke the silence. "What does that mean?" The technician stared at the display. "It means the system cannot assign a value." "That system measures stars collapsing," the observer snapped. "It measures fixed limits," the technician said. This had none. Mara looked up at the words. "Is that bad?" The tall figure hesitated. That pause alone made several observers uneasy. "It is unexpected." Another voice, sharp and controlled, cut in. "End the session." The platform lowered slightly. The restraints that had never activated powered down. Mara stepped back, her boots touching solid ground. Her hands trembled now that the moment had passed. "Am I finished?" she asked. "For now," the tall figure said. As she was guided toward the exit, the observers did not look away. Some leaned forward. Others pulled back. One of them quietly accessed an ancient archive, data sealed for centuries, warnings written by species long gone, predator reflex markers, extinction pressure adaptation, reactive dominance. The observer's eyes widened. Behind Mara, the display flickered once more. The words remained, "Beyond measurable," and somewhere deep within the station a system flagged a change. "Humanity. Status pending." Mara had barely returned to her quarters when the messages began. They were not loud, not urgent, but they carried weight. The Coalition wanted to repeat the trials. Everyone had seen the display, beyond measurable. That word alone unsettled them. The corridors of the orbital station were long, lit by soft white lights that seemed to stretch forever. Mara walked slowly, her hands brushing the walls. She was thinking, trying to understand what had happened. She had reacted, yes, but it felt natural. The system had not prepared for her response. She had not prepared for it either. When she reached her quarters, a small door slid open, revealing a simple room. There was a bed, a table, and a screen. No decorations, no personal effects. Everything was designed to be neutral. Mara sat on the edge of the bed and rested her elbows on her knees. She stared at the floor. She had done something unexpected, something that made the Coalition uneasy. But what exactly? A soft chime echoed in the room. The screen lit up. A human technician appeared on the display. "Mara, you are to report to the testing chamber again. They want to run the baseline trials under tighter conditions." Mara took a deep breath. Tighter conditions? Yes. They want more precision. They want to know if it can happen again. She nodded slowly. It felt like a trap, but she knew she could not refuse. She had no choice. When she arrived at the chamber, the observers were waiting. Their eyes followed her as she moved to the platform. Some were speaking quietly to one another. Others were silent, their attention fixed entirely on her. The first stimulus was simple. A soft light, harmless and slow. Mara moved before the light fully appeared. The display recorded it, then froze. The same word appeared again. Beyond measurable. A technician stepped forward. "Repeat the trial. Double the stimulus speed." Mara stood still. She closed her eyes briefly and focused on the air around her. The chamber lights dimmed. The system released a second stimulus. It was fast, sharper than before. It was designed to overwhelm her senses, to force her into failure. Mara moved. It did not dodge. She intercepted. Her hand passed through empty air where the stimulus should have been, deflecting it as if she could see the future. The platform shook slightly. The display lit up in warning. Numbers tried to climb, to quantify her reaction. The system could not keep up, beyond measurable. The observers whispered among themselves. One of them pulled up a tablet and scrolled through ancient files. This is not just a human anomaly. There are warnings here about species whose reflexes evolve under constant threat. Another observer frowned. That is, old data, irrelevant. Humans were never considered a threat. "They are unpredictable," the first replied. "And unpredictability at this level cannot be ignored." Mara lowered her hand. Her chest was rising and falling quickly. The trial had ended, but she could feel the tension in the room. The Coalition had expected numbers, data, limitations. Instead, they had something beyond measure. They did not know what to do with it. A counselor stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Human, describe what you felt during the test." Mara thought for a moment. I felt like I was too late, like the stimulus was already happening before it existed. The observers did not react immediately. That answer was too simple, too human. They were used to logic, calculations, and probabilities. Mara's response was none of these. A technician tried to rationalize it. Perhaps she guessed the timing. Guessing would not create this result, the counselor said. We need more trials, increase complexity, add multi-layered stimuli. The next trial began. This time, visual, auditory, and tactile stimuli were combined. Mara's body reacted as a single unit, anticipating movements before they arrived. The display could not record the speed. Alarms sounded briefly, then stopped. The final message appeared again. Beyond measurable. Observers started to discuss quietly. If this is not controlled, it could create a danger we cannot calculate. The counselor nodded. Precisely. We cannot risk underestimating them. Mara was allowed a short break. She sat quietly, her mind replaying the tests. She had not expected to be extraordinary. She had not even tried. Yet every motion she made seemed to defy the system. Her reflexes were not just fast. They were layered, intuitive, and unpredictable. When the next round began, other humans were brought in. They were tested under similar conditions. None achieved Mara's exact results, but many surpassed previous human limits. Each trial revealed subtle, almost instinctive reactions that could not be predicted by machines. The coalition's confidence began to waver. They had always measured speed, precision, and reaction. Humans were proving that there were variables they had never considered: instinct, survival experience, and anticipation of danger. One observer whispered almost to herself, "They are not dangerous because they are strong. They are dangerous because they cannot be measured." Mara's trials continued for days. Every session revealed new aspects of her abilities. She did not train for this. She only responded. She did not see herself as extraordinary, only human. Yet every reaction broke the system's calculations, forcing the observers to admit something they had never admitted before. Humans were beyond their understanding. The counselor finally called a halt. Mara was escorted to a private room. She sat, her hands folded, exhausted but aware. The counselor approached her slowly, not with hostility, but with curiosity. "Human, your abilities have forced us to reconsider our classification. You are not ordinary. You are beyond measurable." Mara looked up. "What does that mean?" "It means we do not understand your limits. It means we must study humans more carefully. It means we are cautious." Mara nodded. She had no answers. She only knew that she had done what she could do. She had reacted, she had survived, and she had proved something that no machine or observer could quantify. Outside her room, the observers continued their discussion. Some were excited, some were fearful. They debated the potential and the risk. Mara's actions had changed everything. Humans were no longer just another species. They were an unknown variable, one that could not be ignored. The warning lights of the station blinked softly. The message lingered in the minds of the coalition. Beyond measurable. Humanity was no longer a simple number. Humanity was something else entirely, something unpredictable, something alive. Mara lay back on the bed. She closed her eyes. The tests were not over. The trials would continue. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet. She had acted as she always did, instinctively, without hesitation. And in doing so, she had changed how the galaxy saw her people. Elias moved quietly through the corridors of the orbital station. He was part of the human science team assigned to observe Mara and the other volunteers. Unlike many of the Coalition observers, Elias did not rely on machines or calculations alone. He watched, he listened, and he tried to understand patterns that no device could capture. He had seen the results of Mara's trials. Beyond measurable. The words lingered in his mind like a puzzle with missing pieces. He knew that humans had reflexes shaped by survival, by constant challenges on Earth. Mara was just one example, but she represented something larger, instinctive awareness that could not be replicated. Elias entered the observation room. Screens lit the walls, showing every trial, every reaction. Data streamed constantly. Other humans were on display too, performing exercises similar to Mara's tests. Each one reacted faster than the machines predicted, but none reached Mara's level. The patterns were similar, though. They hinted at an underlying design, a way humans responded to danger that machines could not compute. He took a deep breath. The Coalition had not noticed everything. They were looking for numbers, statistics, measurable limits. Elias understood that they were missing the key factor. Humans did not respond to stimuli the way other species did. Humans adapted. They improvised. They predicted not just motion, but intent. They read the situation in ways that machines could not. Mara had proven it. Elias began recording notes. He marked every trial where humans moved ahead of the signal. He highlighted moments where reactions were not only fast, but anticipatory. He labeled them as instinctive decisions, tied to survival experience rather than conscious thought. But they are unpredictable. That unpredictability is the key. Machines cannot calculate it. They cannot prepare for it. It is a form of intelligence beyond measurement. The observers exchanged uneasy glances. Some nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth. Others were silent, uncomfortable with a conclusion that could not be controlled. Humans were not meant to be understood easily. Mara returned to the chamber for another session. She did not know Elias was observing from a hidden console. She focused only on the exercises in front of her. This time, the stimuli were more complex, overlapping visual, auditory, and kinetic inputs. The system expected her to fail. She moved before the stimuli fully existed. Her body twisted and adjusted, not in steps but as a whole. Numbers climbed beyond the capacity of the displays. Alarms flared briefly, then shut off. Once again, the message appeared, beyond measurable. Elias recorded every moment. He watched the subtle ways Mara adjusted her stance, anticipated motion, and compensated instinctively. It was clear to him now. Humans were not just reacting. They were perceiving the intent behind each stimulus, reading the environment in ways no sensor could detect. After the trial, Elias approached Mara. She was tired, sitting quietly, hands resting on her knees. "You understand, don't you?" he asked. Mara looked at him. "I react the way I do. That's all. I don't know what it means to others." Elias smiled faintly. "It means we are more than they expect, more than machines can measure." Mara nodded slowly. She did not need to say more. She felt the weight of the trials, the awareness of observation, and the knowledge that her reactions had changed perceptions. Back in the observation room, the Coalition was making decisions. They had underestimated humans. The species they thought were simple, fragile, and measurable were not. They were unknown variables, and unknown variables could not be controlled. The counselor reviewed Elias's notes. "We need to classify humans carefully. Their reflexes, their instincts, their adaptability, these are not threats in the traditional sense, but they are outside our calculations. We cannot ignore them." Another observer added, "They cannot be measured, so we must proceed with caution. Treat them as a potential risk until we understand more." Elias nodded silently. He had seen the truth, and it was clear. Humans were unpredictable, instinctive, and beyond the limits of measurement. Mara's next session was scheduled, but Elias knew that this was just the beginning. Each trial revealed new layers, new patterns. Humans were not just reacting to danger. They were evolving in real time, adapting to challenges faster than any machine could calculate. Beyond measurable was not a limit. It was a warning. Mara returned to her quarters after the session. She lay on the bed, exhausted yet alert. She knew that the Coalition would continue to test, to observe, to try to understand. But she also knew that humans were not meant to be measured. They were meant to survive, to adapt, and to react in ways no one could predict. Elias continued his research late into the night. He reviewed every trial, every reaction. He labeled patterns, cross-referenced instincts, and noted each anticipatory movement. The conclusion became clear. Human reflexes were a product of evolution, shaped by danger, survival, and constant adaptation. They were not predictable, and they could not be calculated. The Coalition had always relied on control, on measurement, on certainty. Humans represented uncertainty, and uncertainty was dangerous to those who relied on numbers and rules. Mara closed her eyes, feeling the lingering adrenaline from the tests. She had done nothing extraordinary, yet she had changed everything. Humans were no longer simply a species to observe. They were an unknown variable, one that demanded attention and respect. Outside her quarters, the stars stretched across the void. The orbital station remained quiet, but the awareness of humans, of their instincts, had shifted something deep within the Coalition. Beyond measurable was not just a phrase, it was a reality. A new understanding, a recognition that some things could not be predicted, measured, or controlled. Elias recorded one final note for the night. Humans are not dangerous by design. They are dangerous because they are unpredictable. Their reflexes are layered, instinctive, and anticipatory. Machines cannot calculate them, and observers cannot fully understand them. The trials have proven this. Mara is only the beginning. The screens dimmed, the observation room fell silent, and somewhere deep within the coalition, the recognition of human potential began to spread. Beyond measurable was more than a result. It was a truth that could not be ignored. The simulation room was silent, empty of people, yet alive with data. The coalition had decided to test the human responses using a controlled environment, a simulation designed to measure every possible reaction. Mara's data had been copied and fed into the system, and the simulation began. Initially, the system worked as expected. Obstacles appeared, signals flashed, enemies advanced. The program calculated human responses, estimating the average reaction time and movement. Machines and algorithms were confident that every motion was predictable. Then Mara's reflexes began to act in the simulation. Not Mara herself, but the representation based on her data. At first, it followed the expected patterns. Then it started to move differently. It adjusted positions before attacks occurred. It twisted to dodge before the input was fully calculated. Every motion anticipated the next threat, countering with timing and precision no program had ever accounted for. Observers in the monitoring room leaned forward, eyes wide. Alarms rang briefly, systems recalculated, predictions failed repeatedly, lines of code attempted to adjust, but every adjustment was anticipated by the simulated reflexes. The system began to overheat, unable to keep up with the data it had created. An observer spoke quietly, almost to herself. "It is responding to intent, not just action." Another shook his head. "Impossible. The system is programmed to calculate only physical stimuli. It cannot predict thought or strategy." But the simulation continued. The program adjusted to the movement of the virtual human, only to find its tactics mirrored and countered in real time. Defensive maneuvers became traps for the system itself, retreat points turned into ambushes. The simulation adapted to survive, to anticipate, to counter, and it was not programmed to do this. It was simply the logic of human reflexes layered over data and instinct. The observers grew tense. They had designed the simulation to test limits, not to create an unpredictable intelligence. Yet that was exactly what they had done. What they had unleashed was not Mara alone, but the essence of human reflexes, anticipatory, adaptable, and instinctive. One counselor leaned closer to the screen, voice tight. "Shut it down." Technicians moved to terminate the simulation, but even as they input the commands, the system lagged. It resisted, not with consciousness, but with the unstoppable logic of human instincts encoded in the program. Finally, the simulation halted. Screens went black. Data ceased moving. Silence filled the room. The observers did not speak. They had watched as human reflexes, represented in code, had overtaken the system designed to measure them. It was an event without precedent. Elias stepped forward. "This is what I've been saying. Humans are unpredictable. Their reflexes cannot be calculated, anticipated, or contained by standard programs. They act on perception, anticipation, and instinct in ways that machines cannot replicate." A senior observer frowned. "We underestimated them. What do we do now?" Elias shook his head. "We observe carefully, we learn. But we cannot assume control. We cannot predict outcomes. Every test reveals more layers of instinctive adaptation. Beyond measurable is not a limit. It is the nature of humanity." Meanwhile, Mara was unaware of the chaos her reflexes had caused. She had returned to her quarters, tired but focused. She did not understand how her data could overwhelm the simulation. To her, she had only reacted the same way she always did. It was instinct. It was survival. It was human. Back in the observation room, discussions grew tense. Some observers suggested containment measures. Others argued for further study. The realization had spread humans were not just fast, strong, or clever. They were unpredictable. Unstoppable when instinct and anticipation aligned. Their reflexes could not be captured, quantified, or controlled. Elias reviewed the simulation logs. He noted every movement, every anticipatory action. Each one revealed how humans were not just reacting. They were perceiving intent, adapting strategies, and improvising on the fly. The coalition had assumed that machines could measure everything. They were wrong. The counselor spoke again, voice steady but serious. "We must adjust our approach. Humans are not a simple variable. They are a boundary condition. They define the limits of reactive survival." Observers murmured in agreement, some nodding, others silently digesting the implications. Humans were no longer a species to be measured in numbers and reactions. They were unpredictable, instinctive, and adaptive in ways no system could model. Mara returned to the chamber the next day. She focused only on the trials before her, unaware of the attention she had drawn. Visual, auditory, and kinetic stimuli were combined in complex patterns, each designed to challenge every human instinct. Machines predicted her failure. They expected delays, hesitation, missteps. Mara moved. She twisted, ducked, reached, and countered, all in a single fluid motion. The systems recalculated, numbers spiked, alarms triggered. The display flashed the familiar phrase, beyond measurable. Elias observed quietly, recording every action. He understood now that these trials were not just tests. They were demonstrations of human potential. Each movement reflected layered instincts, survival strategies encoded through generations, a logic of life itself. The Coalition realized the truth. They could not contain this, they could not control it, and they could not predict it. Humans were unpredictable by design. Beyond measurable was not a failure of measurement. It was a statement of human instinct, adaptation, and survival. Mara returned to her quarters, exhausted but alert. She had done what she always did. Reacted, adapted, survived. She did not see herself as extraordinary. She was human, and that was enough. Elias made one final note for the day. Human reflexes are not simply reactions. They are anticipatory, instinctive, and adaptable. Machines cannot calculate them, and observers cannot fully understand them. The simulation has proven this. Beyond measurable is not a limit. It is a reality. Humans define the upper bounds of instinctive survival. The observation room went dark. Screens turned off. Silence returned to the orbital station. Yet somewhere deep in the Coalition, the understanding had shifted. Humans were no longer just another species to measure. They were a force beyond prediction, beyond calculation, and beyond control. Rhea walked through the long corridors of the orbital station, her footsteps echoing softly. She was a human diplomat, chosen to speak for her people. She had observed Mara and the other volunteers, and she understood what the Coalition still struggled to accept. Humans were not ordinary. They were beyond calculation, beyond control, beyond measurable. When she entered the council chamber, the atmosphere was tense. Observers of all species were seated, their eyes fixed on her. They had expected a formal report, but what Rhea carried was something more. History, experience, and truth. She began calmly, her voice steady. You have observed humans under test conditions. You have seen beyond measurable displayed on your systems. You have seen our reflexes, our instinctive responses, and our ability to adapt. But you must understand why we react this way. We do not strike first. We do not act without reason. We respond. We survive. Our reflexes are a product of life itself. The observers murmured among themselves. Some leaned forward, listening intently. Others frowned, unconvinced. Rhea continued, presenting data from Earth, examples of human survival, adaptability, and instinctive decision-making. She showed how humans had endured environmental catastrophes, predator threats, and warfare, all of which had shaped the very reflexes that the Coalition now struggled to measure. Mara, present quietly at the edge of the chamber, listened. She had never spoken formally to the council before, but she understood Rhea's words. Humans were not simply reacting. They were alive, fully aware of danger, able to predict intent and act instinctively. That was their power, and that power could not be contained or measured. A counselor leaned forward. You are suggesting that humans are unpredictable? That their reflexes are a threat if provoked? Rhea shook her head. Not a threat unless you make them one. Humans do not attack without reason, but cornered, endangered, or forced into conflict, our reflexes are instinctive, immediate, and beyond prediction. You have already seen this in the trials, the simulation, the beyond measurable readings. Mara is a clear example, but she is only one of many humans capable of these responses. The room fell silent. Observers exchanged uneasy glances. They had relied on calculations, measurements, and rules. Now everything seemed fragile. Humans were not numbers. They were instinct, intuition, and adaptation. Rhea continued. Containment is not the answer. Observation alone is insufficient. You cannot predict humans, because our responses are layered and complex. We read situations, we anticipate intent, and we act instinctively. That is how we survive. That is how we have always survived. An observer, taller than most, spoke finally. And you expect us to accept this? That we should treat humans not as measurable subjects, but as unpredictable variables? Yes, Rhea replied. Because it is the truth. You have seen the results. You have seen beyond measurable. Our actions are not anomalies. They are the result of experience, survival, and instinct. You cannot contain what you cannot understand. Another observer spoke quietly. The trials have shown humans surpassing limits, anticipating stimuli, reacting before input. This is true. But what of control? What of safety? Rhea met their gaze steadily. Humans define our own limits. Safety comes from respect, not restriction. Observe. Yes. Learn. Yes. But do not attempt to constrain us. That is when instinct becomes defense. That is when reflex becomes unmatched action. Mara watched Rhea's speech carefully. The council chamber was silent, yet the weight of the words was heavy. Humans were being redefined before the eyes of the coalition. Beyond measurable was no longer just a phrase. It was a reality, a rule, a truth. The senior counselor leaned back, considering. You argue that humans should not be controlled even after demonstrating reflexive superiority, that we should trust them? Rhea nodded. Trust, observation, and respect, not fear. Humans are adaptive, instinctive, and capable of reactions that cannot be measured. But our reflexes are not weapons unless provoked. Recognize our unpredictability as a boundary, not a threat. Mara felt a shift in the room. Observers began to nod subtly, accepting the logic. Some whispered to each other, discussing caution, strategy, and observation rather than control. Humans were now seen differently. Not as numbers to be calculated, but as entities defined by instinct and experience. Later, Mara was escorted back to her quarters. She walked slowly, reflecting on the council session. Humans had always relied on instinct to survive, and now the coalition had no choice but to recognize it. Her actions and the lessons Rhea delivered had shifted perception. Humans were unpredictable, instinctive, and capable of responses beyond measurement. That was their strength. Outside, the orbital station floated silently. Stars shone across the void, distant and steady. Inside, a new understanding had taken root. Humans were no longer just another species. They were a boundary, a rule, a standard beyond calculation. They were beyond measurable. Elias reviewed the council transcripts later. He noted the subtle change in language, the careful acknowledgement of human unpredictability, and the agreement that humans could not be contained or fully understood. Mara's trials, Rhea's words, and the beyond measurable readings had redefined humanity's status. They were no longer just subjects. They were a force defined by instinct, adaptation. Mara lay back on her bed, exhausted but aware. She understood the magnitude of what had occurred. Humans were now recognized as unpredictable, capable, and instinctively aware. Their reflexes were not just reactions. They were survival encoded into every cell, shaped by life, danger, and experience. The orbital station remained quiet, but the coalition had been irrevocably changed. Humans were no longer a species to be measured or controlled. They were an unknown variable, a boundary, a force beyond measurable, and Mara, Rhea, and the human volunteers had ensured that the galaxy understood it. The transport shuttle glided through the station's docking bay, silent except for the hum of its engines. Mara sat in the center, restrained lightly for safety, but her eyes scanned every detail. She was aware of the observers, of the cameras, and of the quiet tension that had grown since the council sessions. Humans were now recognized as beyond measurable, and that recognition had brought both respect and caution. Without warning, alarms blared. The shuttle shuddered as defensive protocols activated. Mara's eyes narrowed. She could feel the pattern of danger, subtle at first, then increasing in intensity. A rogue strike force, unauthorized and unannounced, had attempted to intercept her transport. It was fast, coordinated, and lethal by design. Machines calculated that she could not survive. Mara moved. She did not hesitate. Her reflexes, honed by instinct and life itself, reacted before the threat fully existed. She twisted, ducked, and countered in a single fluid motion. The restraints barely slowed her. The shuttle shook as projectiles were deflected or avoided entirely, systems registering movements too fast to measure. The display above her lit up with the familiar phrase, beyond measurable. The strike force recalculated, adjusted, fired again. Mara's body moved as a single unit, instinct guiding every motion. Each action anticipated the next, each dodge, block, or counter seamless and precise. Machines struggled to keep up, alarms ringing, sensors flashing warnings. Elias, observing remotely, noted every action. It is not just speed, he said quietly. It is anticipatory adaptation. Her reflexes are layered. She perceives intent, reacts instinctively, and adjusts in real time. Nothing can measure this. The shuttle's hull shivered as the final wave of attacks came. Mara moved again, instinct guiding her through impossible angles, through the paths predicted by no algorithm. The strike force was overwhelmed not by strength but by unpredictability. Their strategies failed because they assumed standard reaction times and logic. They did not account for instinct layered with anticipation. When the final warning cleared, Mara remained seated, breathing steadily. The strike force had been neutralized, not destroyed, but evaded, disarmed, and miscalculated. The shuttle's systems returned to normal, lights flickering off the warnings. Beyond measurable glowed faintly on the control panel. The observers in the monitoring room were silent. They had witnessed human reflexes in a situation that was meant to be controlled, constrained, and predictable. Yet every calculation had failed. Humans, in their instinct and anticipation, had surpassed all expectations. Mara released a breath she did not know she was holding. She had done what she always did: reacted, adapted, survived. It was instinct, not pride, that had guided her. Yet she understood the message she had sent. Humans were beyond measurable. Machines could not predict them. Observers could not control them. Any threat underestimated human reflexes at their own risk. When she returned to the station, the council convened once more. The rogue strike force had been reprimanded, but the damage to assumptions was done. Humans were no longer a species to be measured or classified within predictable limits. They were a boundary, a rule, a force defined by instinct, adaptation, and the unmeasurable. Elias presented his final report. The trials, the simulations, and the transport incident prove a consistent truth. Human reflexes are not simple reactions. They are anticipatory, instinctive, and adaptive. Machines cannot measure them. Observers cannot fully predict them. Beyond measurable is not a limitation. It is the nature of humanity. The counselors nodded quietly. Their language shifted subtly. Observation replaced control. Caution replaced attempts to predict. Humans were recognized as a force defined by instinct, capable of responses beyond measurement, beyond calculation, and beyond containment. Mara returned to her quarters. She lay back on her bed, feeling the residual tension of the day. She understood now that humans were seen differently. They were a species whose reflexes defined the upper limits of survival. Machines and observers alike had to acknowledge that. They had no choice. Outside, the orbital station floated silently among the stars. The void was calm, indifferent, and infinite. Inside, humans were recognized as beyond measurable. It was not a phrase. It was a truth, a warning, a boundary that defined the galaxy's understanding of instinct, reflex, and life itself. Elias looked over the final data, a quiet smile on his face. Humans had proven, in tests and in instinct, that they were unpredictable, resilient, and adaptive. They were beyond measurable, and nothing could change that. Mara, Rhea, and every human who had participated had set a new standard. They had ensured that their species would never be underestimated, miscalculated, or constrained again. The station's lights dimmed, the observation consoles went silent, and the awareness of human potential spread quietly, firmly, and irrevocably through the coalition. Humans were a boundary species, a force that defined the upper limits of reflexive survival, instinct, and life itself. Beyond measurable was no longer just a warning on a display. It was a truth that would guide the galaxy from this day forward.